before we do that, I have notes from yesterday that you guys asked about. Someone asked about the mint that I was using. Was it regular mint, which we would normally in the United States have as peppermint? Yes, I was using peppermint. That one is called menta in Spanish. That is not the most common mint. And the most commonly used mint for the meatballs and other things in Mexico is hierba buena, and that is spearmint. Now, I went to the grocery store to get all of the ingredients for all of this, and all I could find was peppermint. But sometimes when you go to a Mexican market, you can't find spearmint, or it's super easy to grow. Just always grow it in pots so that it doesn't take over your whole yard, because it will. Second thing, what do you serve with those beautiful meatballs? Well, I would suggest actually rice to go with it, because I like the combination of the white rice pilaf that we made to go with chipotle shrimp earlier. That marries perfectly well with the chipotle meatballs that we did yesterday. And then someone asked me about why the speed of the blades in the blender mattered. Because I said that the blades of a blender go about 3 times the speed of a food processor. The food processor going quite slow for chopping rather than pureeing. And it has to do with the chili skin. So if you're making mole, or if you're making a red chili sauce, those fast blades of a blender will do the trick. And that's why I rely on the blender a lot, because lots of times I have little dried chilies that go into something. Okay, now let's get on to making some guacamole here. I call this my guacamole masterclass, because what I'm going to teach you is how to make guacamole to suit your own taste. I will be posting a recipe later, but that is just nothing but a foundational framework kind of recipe. You should really not use a recipe. You should think about each ingredient as it goes in, and I'll explain that as I go along here. Obviously, the first is an avocado. These are Hass avocados. It is a hybrid form of avocado that was developed in Southern California, in Anaheim, in Orange County back in the 30s. It was developed by a fellow who was a mail carrier. His name was Mr. That's how he pronounced his name. And his name stuck on these because he married the typical avocado from Guatemala, which is large, with the typical native avocado from Mexico, which is small but really flavorful, and came out with this beauty. Okay, so now this Hass avocado, as we call them, we don't call them Hass avocados. The Hass avocado is the one that is pretty much grown all over the world because it's good size, it's got a high oil content, which means that it's going to make creamy guacamole, and it is going to last the longest once it is perfectly soft. But let's just go through the basics here. Okay, these stay on a tree for 12 months. It's one of the longest maturing fruits known to man. And they flower usually sometime around October, November, and then they're picked a year later. They grow to this size in about 3 months. So what's happening in the maturing is the development of the oil necessary here. When it hits a certain level of oil, then they're pulled off the tree. They will never get soft on the tree. They have to be plucked off the tree to start the softening process. And the softening process takes 5 to 7 days. Maybe you've seen ads for these special devices you can put on your countertop that are like domes, and you can put it in there, and they say they will speed up the ripening of the avocado by trapping ethylene gas that is naturally emitted by the avocado. Yeah, they do. They will speed it up maybe 45 minutes to an hour. If your time is worth that, then you just go ahead and buy one of those domed fruit ripeners. Now, this is technically a fruit. Okay, so when we pull it off the tree, we're thinking of it sort of as a fruit. But the Hass avocado, because of its oil content, has a sort of savory flavor. And therefore, we tend to think of it as always going savory. There's one other variety of avocado, and that's the Caribbean avocado. So we've talked about Guatemalan, Mexican, and now Caribbean. It's a large round one, very low oil content. If you mash it, it doesn't look pretty, it won't be creamy. And it has a lighter, fruitier flavor. Therefore, in the Caribbean, usually avocados are used more as a fruit in fruit salads or to make smoothies and things like that. Okay, so we've got this plucked off the tree. If it is cooled down to 50 degrees, it will just be in a state of suspended animation, and you can just leave it cool at 50 degrees or below, and it won't ever start softening. Once you put it back to room temperature, it's 5 to 7 days to get soft. Most of us would pick this up in the grocery store and touch it like that and say, oh, it's soft. But remember, this is the part of the avocado that ripens first. This is the part that ripens last. So when you touch it here, it has to have some give. You have to touch it firmly and feel give. You don't want it to be too soft because then the guacamole will be too soft as well. You want to buy them looking for this little button end in here. This is where the fruit connected to the stem, but you want to get that out right away from all of your avocados because when that's not, there is a chance that air will have gotten in and it will darken that part. The other thing that you want to do, I say, is buy the avocados from a Mexican grocery store because number one, you're more likely to find ripe ones there, and number two, they treat them much more with respect because that's what their clientele is demanding. This is a very, well, let's say, just take a whole box of them and dump them out. They're going to get bruised. And that bruise, of course, will turn something dark, and then you have to get that out when you are scooping out the flesh. Okay, so I've got 3 ripe avocados here. I'm going to cut around the pit on each one of them, and I am going to twist them apart so that I can release the pit. Of course, the pit will stay in one side and not in the other. So I'll twist like that and it'll come out. Then I'm going to take a knife and go in. And this is sort of what we would call the prep cook's way of de-seeding avocados. Because that's usually, like in our place, they're doing a case of avocados at a time, usually 48 avocados at a time. But if you don't feel comfortable taking a knife and going in, so I can just go right in with a spoon and scrape all of the flesh out from this tough skin. Some of you will probably be wondering, once your avocados are completely ripe, or soft, I should say. Can you store them in your refrigerator? Yes, you can store them in your refrigerator for about, well, I would put them in the warmest place in your refrigerator, which would usually be in a vegetable bin. And you could leave them in there for about, let's say they will last in there for about a whole, I'm missing a piece of equipment here and I don't know where it is. I'm just going to use the back of the spoon for this. A lot of times I like to use an old-fashioned potato masher for the mashing. Did I finish that sentence about how long they will last in there? About a week in the refrigerator in the warmest place. Okay, so I'm just going to cut these up now with the side of the spoon, and then I'm going to mash it to a coarse mash. Now you notice how beautiful all of these avocados were, and you're probably saying, man, I get mine home and they've got dark spots in them, they're bruised and all. That's usually because they're not handled properly in the grocery store. Again, I'll go back to say, look for them in a Mexican grocery. They're usually handled a lot better. Okay, so if you had an old-fashioned potato masher, you would just go through this really 3 or 4 times, and you would get something that looks like this. I like chunky guacamole, so I stop when I see all those chunks. Now, there's 2 things that the avocado doesn't have. One of them is any naturally occurring salt. So I have to put salt in this. I'm doing it from high, like I've showed you several times, so that the air helps to distribute the salt as it goes in there. The second thing that avocados don't have is any acidity at all. Typically in Mexico, they will add a little bit of lime juice, but go with great caution, okay? I'm gonna squeeze using the Mexican lime juicer here, but I'm only gonna squeeze just a little bit, a couple teaspoons maybe, up to a tablespoon or so of lime juice in there. Come back and taste it and see how it is. But what we have here now is seasoned mashed avocado. Why did I say to go really lightly on that lime juice? It's because a little lime is a good thing to perk up the flavors. A lot of lime will completely obliterate that flavor of avocado, and all you'll taste is lime. But you're probably saying, but I heard that if I just put enough lime juice into the guacamole, that it'll keep it from turning dark during the party. And yes, that's exactly true, but it'll kill the flavor of the avocado. So all you're tasting is lime. What will really keep, and this, listen to this, what will really keep your mashed avocado, guacamole from turning dark during the party is cold. You want to keep it cold. If you can figure out some way, one of those little freezer bowls that you can put into the freezer beforehand so that it stays really cold, that will keep your guacamole from turning dark, from getting loose. All of the things that we hate about guacamole that sits on a table in a party for a long time. Okay, right now what I have here, a lot of people in Mexico would call guacamole, and that may surprise you. I'm gonna give it a taste to see if it's seasoned. Has a little bit of lime, has a really nice amount of salt, so I'm good with that. Why would somebody in Mexico call that guacamole? It's because they're going to use it differently than we use guacamole here in the United States. First of all, they're going to use it as a condiment. So if you think about making the perfect steak taco, and you've got a beautiful fresh made corn tortilla and some grilled steak chopped up on top of it, and then you scoop some of this seasoned mashed avocado on that, and then a little bit of pico de gallo, salsa mexicana over the top, you've got the perfect mouthful. But you can see how this seasoned avocado just plays right in there in the middle of it. Because people in Mexico are not big chip dippers, okay? They don't go for all the chips and dips that we have in the United States. We want guacamole that's loaded with stuff. So what's a classic guacamole going to be loaded with? It's going to be the 4 ingredients that perhaps that street vendor making the steak taco has put in his or her pico de gallo or salsa mexicana. It's going to be tomatoes, onions, cilantro, and some kind of hot green chili. Okay, so 4 ingredients, but each one of them plays a very specific role. And when you understand the role that those things play, then you can make your perfect guacamole. So I'm encouraging you guys to go into the kitchen and add those 4 ingredients to suit your own taste. Tomato will add a touch of sweetness. Onion will add a very fresh crunch. Cilantro, of course, will add herbal notes, and then the chile will add something spicy. So let's go through and talk about how we're going to do each one of those things. I'll just move this over here, and let's start with the onion. I've said to you folks a number of times that white onion is the onion of Mexico, not yellow onion. In here, you will notice a huge difference in flavor. So white onion is what I'm going to use here. You'll notice if you go to a Mexican market that they will always have these knob onions. These are the kind that are typically grilled by the taco makers and served alongside the tacos. But if you just leave this in the ground a little bit longer, it will grow to a full-size bulb. In Mexican markets, they love to sell them fresh, just fresh dug ones, because they love that bright, fresh flavor. Here, when we find white onions, they're typically already cured. That's what the farmers would call it, cured, so that they can store it for quite some time. Now, I don't want very much of the onion in here, personally, I don't. I'm just going to show you how I would make this. And I'm going to cut this onion into small dice. When you're talking about making any kind of like a pico de gallo or a guacamole, size really does matter here, and you want things to be small so that you have a really nice distribution of flavor. Now this is probably the most important thing that I can tell you in this whole demo. When you cut into an onion, you break cell walls and bring two elements together, which create a sulfurous compound. Now that may sound like a lot of science, but that's what makes your eyes water. It perhaps makes it not so digestible for you. It's what gives you onion breath. You created it by making the cuts, so you can also get rid of it. All you have to do is rinse it off. Now I decided not to go over to the sink. Usually I would just do this under cold running water. But if you really want to make sure that all of this is off of it, then add a little dash of vinegar or some lime juice to the water, and that will protect it even more. Okay, so I'm going to put the onion now over here on this side of it. So I can get rid of all of this stuff now. Let's talk next about the chili. So I brought two different chilies. Probably a lot of you, when you're thinking green chilies, are gonna think about getting a jalapeno. I typically like to use the serranos. I've cooked with serranos with you guys a lot. Why do I do that? Because jalapenos have been bred differently. So now you can find a completely mild jalapeno. Why anybody wants that, I don't know. I thought that was a green bell pepper, but some people that want to have a completely mild jalapeno. So when you go to the store and buy your jalapenos, you don't know whether they're going to be hot or completely mild. With the serranos, that breeding has not been going on, so I typically like to do the serranos because I know that if I like my guacamole with one serrano in it, I can almost always guarantee it's going to have the same spiciness one time to another. Now I'm using the typical Mexican technique here, I split it lengthwise in half and then in quarters, and then I'm going to very finely chop across it. And I'm doing it seeds, veins, and all, because I'm actually using it to be a little bit of the heat, or all of the heat for this particular preparation. So I'm going to put that right there. If you're a person that likes chili flavor, not a lot of heat, then just look at this. When I cut this open here, you can see this is the white vein that's right there. It becomes the seed pod up here. All you have to do is to cut that whole thing out, vein and seed pod, and that will make this jalapeno less spicy. Okay, now we're gonna go on to our cilantro. I'm just going to take a little bunch of it, use the technique that I've showed you guys before, which is actually to make in it. Okay, so wadding up the top, folding under the top leaves, I'm holding all of this in a tight bunch, and then I am going to cut crosswise here into the very thin slices. So that's my chiffonade. And cut across like that until I run out of leaves. I'm using the stems in there as well because they're tender and they're very flavorful. Get rid of that guy over there, some of these leaves that didn't get caught in it, and there's my cilantro to go into. The last thing that we have to talk about is the tomato. And I always waver on this. There are some people that don't put any tomato in it at all, but then you don't have that sort of sweet element that goes into guacamole. And so I tend to like a little bit of it in there, but if I can't get good tomatoes, then I struggle a lot. Used to in our restaurant, before we had really good fresh tomatoes all year round that really tasted like tomatoes, we would go in the winter time to using really nice sun-dried tomatoes. A little bit different flavor, but it adds that touch of sweetness that I think is really good. Okay, so I'm going to take the tomato that I'm going to put in there, and I'm going to cut crosswise here until I get to the other side. And then I'm gonna just lay those pieces down and cut crosswise that way, and then this way, which will give me a nice tiny dice, which is what I'm looking for here. With this one, you'll notice that when I cut into these beautiful tomatoes, that they have, they're red all the way through, which is what I'm looking for here. So I'll do the last. This is the time when we can start talking about all the variations that can go on. I told you about sweetness with tomato, fresh crunch with the onion, and then herbal and spicy. So you can find things in those categories that will work really well for you. You don't like white onion, you like red onion, that's great. Sometimes when I do red onion in here, instead of tomatoes, like right now, is mango season. So I think, why not put some mango in there and make this beautiful mango guacamole with red onions? And then I like the flavor of habanero chili because it's very fruity. So I might use the habanero chili, not too much of it, for that. And then instead of the cilantro, maybe a little bit of mint to go there because that's so good with the mango. So you can use the 4 categories, and as long as you've got a beautifully flavored base, that will lead you down a path that I think will be really wonderful. Okay, so the last little bit of tomato here is getting chopped up, and I will scoop that into the bowl. I think that looks like the proper amount for me. And I've spread all of those guys out there so that you can see kind of the proportion that I'm working with there. But again, I will say, it's all up to you and what you like in the balance of things for the guacamole. So all we have to do now is stir all of this gently together. And since I had a well-seasoned base, I know it's going to be really delicious. I know that this is going to be a great chip dip. So I'm going to scoop it into a bowl over here that is surrounded by chips, but don't forget that there's other wonderful crunchy things like cucumber. Cut some cucumber on a bias. Jicama, if you like jicama, that root vegetable that's so popular in Mexico, that is a wonderful vegetable device for doing the chipping and the dipping. I'll take a little bit of the cilantro leaves for a garnish on the top of it. And now we're off to our main event really here, which I think is margaritas. So I've invited my daughter Lainey, who's our beverage manager for all of our restaurants, and she is going to take you through making a classic margarita and then a spicy mezcal margarita. Are we going to call it a margarita?
Totally.
Okay, take it away.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for joining us and learning a little bit with me about margaritas today. So want to start off with sort of just the general basic principles behind a margarita. Now, a margarita is a classic sour cocktail. So you can, if you Google a sour cocktail, I was just looking stuff up just to see what the internet said. There's lots of different sort of proportions out there, but here's the things that you need to always keep in mind. We need to balance our sweet with the acid. So no matter what, you want to always have the same quantity of those 2 ingredients. So for that, I like to think of those portions as sort of 1. So you'd do 1 to 1 for your sour and your sweet. Now, some people will say maybe 2 ounces for your straight spirit to go into that. But as we've sort of developed these margarita recipes, I've personally found I really like the balance of 1.5 ounces of my straight spirit in there. So when I'm thinking of a basic margarita proportion, I'm going to do 1 ounce of something sweet, 1 ounce of something sour, and 1.5 ounces of something boozy or spirit. So I'm going to go ahead and start with just a very classic margarita. In terms of your sour, as my dad has showed you guys a couple times, fresh squeezed lime juice is absolutely key. It's going to give you a lot of that really nice perfuminess from the pith of the lime itself, and just give you the most fresh flavor of juice. I've gone ahead and already squeezed that, so I'm going to add 1 ounce of the lime juice for our cocktail. Ooh, went a little over there. Now, going into the sweet category, for a classic margarita, that's actually going to be divided up into 2 components. So something very just straight sweet, which would be some sort of either simple syrup, which you can easily make at home by using equal parts sugar and water, and either just stirring the mixture until the sugar dissolves or heating it up just a little bit to get that sugar to dissolve quicker. So you can make that at home. It's shelf stable. It can last in your refrigerator for a couple months. Or you can use something like agave nectar, which is what I'm going to use today. Agave nectar will be slightly sweeter than your simple syrup. So if you like something a little on the sweeter side, I would go ahead and use that agave syrup. You can also use honey if that's something that you have readily available. So I'm going to do a 1/2 ounce of that. Again, I did say that the sweet component had to be divided up into 2 different ingredients. So I'm doing a 1/2 ounce of that. Now, if you don't have one of these very fancy cocktail jiggers at home, you can just go ahead and use 1 tablespoon. That's equivalent to a 1/2 ounce. So I'm doing a 1/2 ounce here of my agave nectar. Now, the other component is going to be our orange liqueur. That's very traditional in a margarita. Now, there are lots of different kinds of orange liqueur out there, and I'm sort of going to talk to you about 2 different kinds today. The first one is going to be a classic Cointreau. Now, Cointreau does not have, it's just a basic sort of, probably, it depends, some sort of sugar distillate like beet or sugar cane, and then it's infused with the orange peels themselves. There is no sort of brandy or cognac mixed into it, which is going to be the other variety of orange liqueur that you can find out there.
If people are more used to using triple sec, this would be more like triple sec.
This is going to be just like triple sec, and it's clear when you pour it. That's the key thing you can see. If your orange liqueur is clear, that's going to be more similar to a triple sec. Right. If it is brown, that's when you know that it's going to be got a little bit of cognac or maybe some brandy added to there, and it's also maybe going to be a little bit on the sweeter side.
Yes.
So a 1/2 ounce or 1 tablespoon of that orange liqueur, again I'm using Cointreau for this one, is going to go in, and that is our 1 ounce of something sweet together. So it's a 1/2 ounce of the agave nectar with a 1/2 ounce of the orange liqueur. Now, moving on to the best part, the straight spirit. So for today, I'm going to be using a Blanco tequila. Now, when you use a Blanco tequila, especially mixed with something like the triple sec or Cointreau, you are going to get a brighter, lighter margarita. If you did want something a little bit sweeter, richer, rounder, you could go ahead and use a Reposado, or even if you're really fancy and balling out, an Añejo tequila.
All of those, that's just in layers of aging.
Yes,
so this
correct.
is unaged, and then the Reposado is aged 2 to 12 months, and then the Añejo is something over 12 months in oak.
In oak, so that anytime it's aged in oak, it is going to give it a little bit of sweetness.
Yes.
So I really like the brand Espolón, especially for making margaritas. It's a really well-made tequila that is a price point that you can find at most local liquor stores. So as I said at the beginning, I'm going to be using 1.5 ounces of that. Again, if you're doing this with tablespoon measures, which is absolutely fine, you'd be using 3 of those. So that is all the components that we have here in our shaker ready to go. Now we just need a little bit of ice.
I got your ice.
I just need a little scoopy. Go ahead and put some ice into my cocktail shaker. Now, I am using a traditional Boston shaker, absolutely a bartender's tool, but of course the cobbler French shakers that have the tops on them, just as great to do. So for this, I'm going to do things when you shake a drink. The first is you're actually diluting it a little bit. You're breaking up the ice and sort of getting a little bit of water content in there. That helps with the cocktail coming together as a whole. You're also breaking down some of those juice particles in there. Again, what you're really trying to do is combine the flavor and make it all taste cohesive. So I guess it's 3 things, because the last thing you're doing with it is that you're making it cold. Everybody wants a cold margarita. So we are ready to strain that into a glass. Personally, I like my margaritas up, so with no ice in them, but of course you can do it on the rocks as well. Which you can just take what you have in here and dump it into a glass. Very easy. Now, if you don't have one of these handy dandy bar strainers, you can go ahead and just use a tea strainer and dump it over that to take the ice cubes out.
And one thing that I love about when you shake it like that is that you'll get little shards of the ice on the top, and it looks so refreshing.
Yes, refreshing and delicious.
Right.
So we've got our first very classic margarita done for you guys. So now we're gonna mix it up a little bit and do a little bit of a variation. So, as my dad was showing you earlier, we talked a little bit about chilies. So the first thing that I'm gonna do in our variation here is actually take 2 little pieces of jalapeno that I've cut up. You can see I left the seeds and the veins in there, as I do want a little bit of spice from these. And I'm gonna dump them into my shaker. Now, if you've got a bar muddler at home, absolutely use that. Or you can just take the back of a spoon.
Describe for us what a bar muddler looks like.
It is a
like a little tiny rolling pin.
Yes, that's great. A little tiny rolling pin that has something like maybe black on the bottom, which would be the end that you would smash down. So what we are trying to do with this is break apart the jalapenos and release all of the spice, because we do want, this is going to be a spicy mezcal margarita, so we do want a little bit of heat in that. So I'm just going to take the back of my spoon and smash it. And seeds are going to go flying.
Well, doing that will release all of that green chili flavor.
Absolutely.
And obviously the heat as well.
And so
you're not like trying to get a puree. You're just trying to break it all up.
So if you want to take a look inside of here, that's all you really need to do. It's, again, you're releasing the aromas and the flavor and a little bit of the heat. Now, my dad was saying earlier, Serranos are going to have a little bit more heat typically and consistently. So I always go jalapeno in cocktails. Personally, I find Serranos can be a little overwhelmingly spicy in them. And what I love about this is sort of, he was saying, is you do get a little bit of that milder flavor and just that great green going on. So now that we've done that, I'm going to go back to our basic recipe again, starting from the top with 1 ounce of lime juice. So this is actually going to be pretty much the same proportions than what we just did. I'm just mixing up the ingredients we're using a little. Now, back to the sweet. I'm going to continue with the agave nectar, but, spoiler, I am going to be using a brandy or cognac-based orange liqueur, so that has a little more sweetness. I'm just going to go a little shy on my agave for this one. So just
a little less than
half an ounce. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, just to make sure that it's not too sweet. Personally, not a sweet cocktail drinker, so I want to keep it well balanced. So adding just a little bit less than a half an ounce or a little bit less than 1 tablespoon in there. Now, this is a very classic orange liqueur I think people are familiar with, which is Grand Marnier. Again, this has a little bit of some brandy mixed into it. So it is going to be a darker color. It is going to be slightly sweeter, but still have that delicious orange flavor to it. So adding a half ounce of that. And as you can see in here, it is a brown liqueur. It's a little hard to tell in these, the same plant, but made in a totally different way. The biggest difference, I would say, in terms of the flavor is that the agave parts, which is what's used to make all of this, where all the sugar lies, is cooked in an over open fire. So sort of buried in a big open flame pit for many days is what's needed to cook the agave hearts, as they're very large. So it is going to give it a slightly smoky flavor.
And the agave varieties are different in mezcal. Tequila has to be made only with blue agave.
Absolutely, yes.
And there's dozens of varieties that can be used in mezcal.
Yes, absolutely. But the main one that you would look for in terms of mixing stuff is anytime you would see the word espadine. Let me see if I can find it here on this bottle for you.
I think that's all espadine.
It is 100%. It just unfortunately does not say it on the label.
But a lot of times you will see it written on the label.
Tequila, so that flavor is going to be a little bit of the most similar from these two. So Del Maguey is absolutely a phenomenal brand for you to find. It's also pretty readily available in a lot of different stores, liquor stores, and we have them to thank for sort of the mezcal craze here in the United States, as they were the first ones to import artisanal mezcal. Really good mezcal to the United States.
Yeah.
So they've actually just celebrated, I believe, their 25th or almost 25th anniversary. So they've been doing this for a long time and definitely got it down.
Now this variety is called Vida, and it is what you would call, most mezcal is sipping mezcal only, not cocktail mezcal, and this variety is available at a lower price point for this kind of thing.
Absolutely. So just going to do another 1.5 ounces for the 3 tablespoon measurement, same that we did before, of this Vida mezcal. And now we are ready to shake it. But before we do so, I want to show you how to rim a cocktail glass so you can do some fun rims. Salt rim obviously is very common to do it with, but so what I'm going to show you how to do is first you're going to have to wet the glass. So if you've used a lime or half a lime before when you're squeezing that, you can use that, or I had to have this grapefruit. So all you need to do is roll the rim of the glass to get it a little wet.
But you could do this with a lime too.
Yeah, absolutely. You can do it with a lime, anything like that, yes. So make sure you get it all the way around, and something that's really crucial is that it's also making it a little bit sticky. So then you can pour your salt, or in the case of what I am using, thank you for the help, is tahine. So this is a really tasty, it's sort of chili, a little bit of citric acid and salt. It goes really great with a spicy cocktail. So you're just going to do the same technique where you sort of roll it around on the plate until you've covered all the sides.
So you could do that if you want salt on the rim.
Absolutely.
You could do the same process but with straight salt.
But with straight salt, or you could do it with tahini if you're looking for something to spice it up a little bit. Yeah. So now we've got this beautifully rimmed glass here, and we're going to...
I got too much water in there.
Yeah. Come on, my barback needs to step up his game here. So adding the ice to that. And we're gonna go ahead and shake this one up again. Now, something that is crucial to think about when you are doing this one, if you're going to have it on the rocks, is that if you dump all of this right now just into a glass, it will have those jalapeno pieces in it. Right. So the longer that those sit, the spicier your drink is going to be. So I would, even if you want it on the rocks, I would highly suggest to strain this through either using a bar strainer or a tea strainer, and get all the ice, especially in jalapeno pieces, out before you then add maybe some new ice to it. So I'm gonna go ahead and pour this guy into here. Now you do see a little bit of those seeds left in there. That is fine. I personally like that a little bit, giving it that nice sort of color and texture there. Whoop, drop that.
Okay.
Again,
so there we have the spicy jalapeno mezcal margarita,
yes.
A really classic bright margarita, and then some guacamole to go with it. It seems like that we should have a party. Okay.
If only we could. If only we could.
One last thing that I need to talk to you guys about. You know, our restaurant, Shoko, is still open for business, for takeout and for delivery. And a lot of our farmers are really struggling right now because the rest of our restaurants aren't open. So to help one of our farmers, the seedling fruit farm, we are making these amazing sour cherry cobblers this weekend. So if you want one to celebrate, it's going to come to you like this, unbaked, and then you can just pop it into the oven and cook it for about 45 minutes or so, and it will be like this. This stuff is so amazing because we live, of course, in sour cherry area here, but with a really classic crunchy topping, cobbler topping here. It is so absolutely delicious. I've used the word cobbler and I should have used the word crisp this whole time. So please go back and mark out cobbler and all of it. These are crisps. So if this appeals to you, please order one this weekend. It's going to be really helpful for our farmers Thank you for hanging out in the kitchen. Thank you to my daughter for coming and giving us a lesson in classic margaritas as well. Thank you all so much for being here.